Hey guys, tonight we're going to saddle up on the forgotten roads of ancient Persia. Imagine the slow rhythm of hooves against stone, the wind curling past your ear as a distant mountain range crests into view. It's the 5th century BCE, and yes, you are now an imperial courier. You're galloping with a leather satchel bound to your side, carrying a sealed message from the King of Kings himself. No pressure. But miss your mark, and you might find yourself on dung scooping. Duty back at the stables. You're surrounded by arid plains and sun-scorched hills. The air dry enough to chap your lips into ancient scrolls. All you can hear is the faint jangle of tack and the occasional snort of your horse. Who between you and me probably knows the route better than you do? This isn't the modern world of text messages, and sorry, I just saw this. Is ancient bureaucracy in motion, and you're part of a living machine that spans an empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Persian postal system didn't have a catchy brand name, but it had astonishing reach. Stretching from Sardis in modern-day Turkey to Susa in Iran, the system was a masterpiece of engineering, politics, and brute horseflesh. The Achaemenid Empire needed communication quickly and constantly. Orders had to be issued, rebellions sniffed out, and grain taxes tracked without the benefit of Zoom meetings or oddly passive-aggressive emails. The man behind this grand vision? Darius I, also known, unofficially, as the guy who couldn't stand logistical chaos. He was the first to standardize the empire's infrastructure with a seriousness usually reserved for IKEA instructions. Under Darius, the Royal Road was expanded and fortified, and the postal service became a pillar of Persian control. You ride now along that very royal road. The surface beneath you is no accident, it's paved in sections, compacted, graded, and maintained with imperial funding. In places, it's wide enough for chariots. In others, just a narrow pass between jutting rocks. But always, every 15 to 18 miles, there's a roadside rest station, a sort of ancient combination of gas station, inn, and government checkpoints. Each rest stop features a fresh mount, a postmaster who might also double as a spy, and food that ranges from surprisingly edible to why is this humming? But to you, these stations are lifelines. You pass the scroll to the next courier, grab a new horse, and sprint into the distance like an ancient relay team competing for royal favor. One Greek observer, Herodotus, famously said that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers. Sound familiar? Yep, that's the line the U.S. Postal Service proudly borrowed from this ancient setup. Though, to be fair, they left out nor mountain lions, nor sandals falling apart mid-mission. Now, you may be wondering, how exactly did they make this whole thing work in a world without GPS? That's the kicker. Historians still argue whether the system relied on standardized waypoints with trained local guides or whether each courier memorized their stretch of land like a human compass. Either way, these people were navigating mountain passes and river crossings with nothing more than the stars above and a really solid sense of direction. Your saddlebag, tightly bound with leather straps, holds a message cylinder made from hardened parchment, sealed with a royal insignia enclave. It's cracked or broken. The next station has questions, and you really don't want to answer those with saddle sores and sweat dripping into your eyes. The messages range from simple orders, send more grain, to Ekbatana, to life and death decrees, including pardons or executions. In one moment, you could be carrying hope. In the next, a death sentence. But you're not allowed to peek. Not that you'd want to. Tampering could lead to a punishment involving public humiliation, fines, Or, if you're really unlucky, being demoted to counting arrows in a damp storeroom. Somewhere near the Caspian Sea, you gallop past traders leading donkeys piled high with lapis lazuli, past soldiers adjusting their armor in the dust, past children chasing goats with sticks. Life along the Royal Road is more than just dispatches and couriers. It's the hum of an empire moving in rhythm. And here you are, part of it, tired, slightly dehydrated, but part of it, and though you may not know it, your ride is being watched. From a shaded rock outcrop, a royal inspector scribbles notes on your posture, your speed, and whether you remembered to bow before handing over your package. These inspectors, known as the King's Eyes, keep the system sharp, loyal, and utterly terrifying if you're caught napping. But right now, your focus is simple. Don't fall off. Don't drop the scroll. And definitely don't accidentally insult the next station master's cooking, unless you like your barley stew extra, salty with a side of grudge. You haven't been riding long when the smell of smoke hits your nosewood smoke, not danger. That's a good sign. It means a courier station is just ahead. You spot it moments later, a square compound with mud brick walls and a wooden gate, marked with the official seal burned into a slab above the entrance. The horses whinny in greeting as you approach. You swing off, your thighs aching, your back arguing with every step. The station master, bearded and squinting under the weight of permanent sunburn, greets you with a nod. He takes your horse with a muttered comment about how skinny it looks. Rude hands you a lukewarm barley drink and leads you to the fresh mount already saddled and fidgeting nearby. There's no house of the weather, no chat about family, just work. Because the message you're passing off outranks small. Talk that this station is one of many along the Royal Road, the backbone of Persian communication. First carved out under earlier kings, but perfected by Darius I, the Royal Road ran more than 1,500 miles from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east. It slashed travel time from months to mere days. Some sources say a message could go from one and to the other in 9 days less time than it takes to get a decent reply to a work email today. The design was meticulous. Road crews smoothed the surface with gravel and clay, reinforced weak areas with stone, and added drainage canals where the rain could wash away a weaker empire's ambition. At regular intervals, roughly the distance a horse could sprint before, tiring rest stations known as chaparkhane were built. You could picture them like little time capsules of order along a chaotic map. Food, water, shelter, a new horse, and a quick gossip exchange. Historians still debate whether these stations also functioned as micro-administrative centers, mini bureaucracies for remote areas, or if they were strictly for dispatches and riders. Some records suggest local officials used them to host tax audits and hold quick trials. Others say those were separate buildings entirely. Honestly, knowing Persia, it was probably both at once, depending on how many scrolls were piling up. Each station had to maintain a small team of horses, grooms, guards, and scribes. And those scribes, they were the quiet geniuses of the whole operation, trained to quickly log arrivals, departures, rider names, and the general condition of each message seal. If a courier showed up looking suspiciously lighter or suspiciously sweaty, they made a note. And those notes sometimes went straight to the palace. It was all part of the ancient system known as the Angarium, the state courier relay. The word survives today in dusty etymology books and obscure crossword puzzles. But back then, it was an empire's nervous system. You rode the veins. The king was the brain, and all the couriers, hundreds, maybe thousands over the years, were the fast-moving thoughts of a ruler who could be weeks away but still managed to give someone a very bad day. Via scroll, one fringe theory, and yes, it's just a theory, suggests that elite couriers may have had small tattoos or marks indicating their clearance level. There's no direct evidence, but some clay fragments mention Rider of 5 Hills, which might indicate access across 5 regional boundaries. Cool if true, but imagine trying to explain that tattoo to your parents. No, Mom, it's not. A goat. It's national access. You mount your fresh horse. It's younger, jumpier, and clearly thinks it's racing the wind. The station master hands you your next dispatch, and you're off again, hooves clattering down a compacted stretch of road. This section passes through low hills, dotted with scrub and the occasional crumbling statue. An old shrine to Mithra sits. Near the road's edge, half swallowed by dirt. You make the sign of respect as you pass, not because you're especially devout, but because out here, every ounce of luck helps Dot. As the sun starts to dip, the color of the landscape shifts too. Copper and rose. Shadows grow longer, and you keep your eyes peeled for wolves, or worse, bored mercenaries looking for something to poke. That's why most road segments had roving guards, lightly armed, and usually underpaid. Dedicated enough to keep the message system from collapsing every time a goat thief got frisky. These guards also watched the road's condition. A single flash flood could wash out 100 miles of route. One poor soul in the archives even filed a request for emergency gravel. You imagine the palace official reading that and sighing heavily while reaching for his wine jug. And what did Darius get out of this massive investment? Control, mostly. Reliable information was the empire's armor. The king could respond faster to revolts, adjust tax quotas on the fly, and remind wayward governors that yes, the throne was still watching. It's one thing to have an empire. Another thing entirely to feel present in all of it at once. And let's not pretend this was all about statecraft. Some messages were purely personal family notices, ceremonial invitations, even love letters cloaked in code. One fragment found near Persepolis included a string of poetic metaphors that may or may not have meant, "I miss your cooking more than I miss my last horse." As you ride into the dusky horizon, you feel more than just exhaustion. You feel part of a pattern. One rider replaces the next. One message gives way to another. And through it all, the road carries you forward. Your legs are beginning to ache, in that special way only long-distance riders understand. But there's no stopping yet, not with the king's message strapped to your hip and another 20 miles before the next post. The horse beneath you snorts, its breath misting in the cool twilight. The scent of sweat, leather, and distant wild thyme drifts on the wind as you ride on. One courier in a centuries-old chain. The gear of a Persian courier is not glamorous. This isn't some golden chariot. Fantasy. You're dressed for survival. Your boots are thick-soled, made of boiled leather that creaks with every movement. The soles have been patched twice. Your robe, practical rather than fashionable, is wrapped tight with a sash where your dagger and small pouch of dried figs hang. And your satchel, the heart of your mission, is crafted from hardened camel leather, reinforced with copper fasteners and double-strapped across your back. Rain, dust, or prying hands, nothing's getting through that bag without a struggle. Inside, a waxed scroll sealed with a clay bula, lump of hardened clay stamped with the royal cylinder seal. If you lose it or deliver it broken, well, you'd better have a stunningly good excuse, and perhaps a second horse waiting for a quick getaway. The relay doesn't run only on road, and horses it runs on trust. There were no tracking numbers or delivery confirmations. Instead, there was an entire subculture of station masters, grooms, and scribes whose lives revolved around moving things from one point to another without error. Lose a scroll, and you risk weeks of political chaos. Misplace a tax tally, and a village gets overcharged for the next harvest. That kind of mistake doesn't just ruin someone's day, it gets you written into the margins of history as a cautionary tale. And let's not forget the camels. While the official couriers, the Angaro, usually rode horses for speed. There were bulk deliveries carried on the backs of Persia's tireless, kneecap-wobbling camels. These weren't messages exactly, but parcels, records, and supplies. Well, you might be speeding off into the night on a thundering horse. There's always a caravan somewhere behind you, trudging steadily along with bundles of clay tablets and rations of dried fish. Not all messengers were fast, but some were consistent to the point of legend. Historians still argue whether camels were truly integrated into the core postal relay or just used in support roles, especially in the desert stretches of the empire. One camp believes the Persians considered them too slow and untrustworthy for message delivery. Another points to archaeological finds leather scroll containers built to hang from camel saddles as proof they had a role, even if an unglamorous one. Either way, one thing's for certain: no matter how noble your horse thinks it is, camels will always win in a long-haul race through sandstorms as the moon begins to rise and the sky turns navy. You pass another lonely figure headed in the opposite direction. It's another courier. You exchange no words, just a quick glance, a mutual nod of endurance, and you ride on. It's oddly comforting to know someone else is living the same ache, the same mission, the same awkward saddle sores. The postal network wasn't just a straight line. Like veins branching through a body, it splintered into secondary roads, linking cities, satrapal capitals, and sacred shrines. The scale of the Achaemenid Empire, spanning from Libya to the Indus Valley, meant roads had to be flexible, built for war, peace, tax collection, and festival invites all at once. And these roads? They were expensive. You're riding across infrastructure that cost years of labor, thousands of workers, and an administrative machine that could make today's civil service look like amateur hour. Some stones bear the marks of regional builders coded. Chisel cuts that say, built by the satrap of Cappadocia, or this stretch maintained by order of Artaxerxes. Persia wasn't shy about self-promotion. That's another thing your boots are treading: imperial pride. The road is a message, too silent, but undeniable. It says, we are organized, we are fast, we are watching. You tug the reins, guiding your horse around a broken cart axle abandoned near a bend. Someone's misfortune from days ago, maybe weeks. It's a reminder. This job, while noble, isn't without risk. Bandits aren't exactly discouraged by scrolls of royal wax. And some rebellions start with the cutting of a road, which is why couriers were often armed. Not heavily or not marching into battle, but enough to defend yourself long enough to flee, or at least look threatening until the shouting stops. A small dagger, maybe a short bow if you've got good aim. And courage, of course. That's part of the kit. Sometimes you're not alone. Important dispatches traveled with guards, sometimes even full squads depending on their contents. Rumor has it, one message, just a single line of royal command, was once protected by 12 horsemen, a cart, and an ox with ceremonial bells. The message: an invitation to a royal wedding. To be fair, the guest list included half the empire, and once in a while, very rarely, you get to ride into a city. The crowds part. Children stare. Merchants lift their heads from coin counting, because your arrival might mean war or peace, or taxes, or a new governor. A scroll in a satchel, carried across mountains and rivers, might change everything. But tonight, it's just another leg of the journey. The stars emerge, cool and patient. You adjust your sash, whisper something half encouraging to your mount, and keep going. The next morning breaks with the subtle cruelty of desert light. You're on the move before sunrise, your horse's hooves muted in the pre-dawn stillness. Your fingers are stiff, and there's a cramp in your lower back that feels older than time itself. But the message must go on, somewhere along the road. Your mind drifts, as it often does, to that odd Greek fellow who couldn't stop asking questions. Xenophon, a mercenary, historian, and all-around curious man. He's one of the few outsiders who left behind a detailed peek into Persian courier life. His writings, particularly the Anabasis, like a travel diary with an unusual number of ambushes. Xenophon wasn't a postman, but he observed closely. And what he saw impressed him. A relay system so effective that no empire west of Persia had ever matched it. He described it with admiration. The riders, the speed, the commitment. He even noted how each courier only carried a message for one. Day before passing it along a system of relentless efficiency. You picture him now, K-scroll in hand, scribbling notes while trying to avoid offending the nearest satrap. His admiration wasn't just for the speed, was for the elegance. No one else had done it like the Persians. Greeks, for all their drama and oratory brilliance, couldn't deliver a note across their own peninsula without for arguments and a lost sandal. But Persia ran like a giant clock. And you, right now, are one of its ticking gears. The Greeks would eventually adopt versions of this system, but always imperfectly. Roman messengers came close centuries later, but they borrowed the idea of roadside stations and fresh horses from the Persians. Historians still debate whether Xenophon's accounts were exaggerated to flatter his hosts or to warn his fellow Greeks of how organized the Persians truly were. You pass a cluster of ruins to your right once a station. Now, just stones swallowed. By wind, a crow hops along the roofless edge, eyeing you like it knows secrets. You wonder if this place had once hosted Xenophon himself. Maybe he sat right here, eating barley bread, trying to figure out how the Persians always seemed to know what was happening before it happened. Speaking of knowing things early, some post stations had early warning system signals to alert the next stop that a courier was incoming. Smoke plumes, polished metal reflecting sunlight, or messengers on foot sprinting ahead were all used depending on the terrain. The idea was simple but brilliant. By the time you reached the next post, they already had your horse ready and someone waiting to grab the scroll. One slightly obscure record even suggests some stations had bells strung across trees, a kind of early doorbell activated by pressure on the road. The courier would pass a trigger point, the bell would chime, and the station master would leap up from his nap and pretend he'd been ready all along. It wasn't just speed. The Persian postal system valued rhythm, predictability. A rider was expected to arrive within a certain window, and if he didn't, well, someone went looking. Or worse, someone reported it, which meant paperwork, which meant someone else had. A very bad day, and of course, Xenophon wasn't the only foreigner to take notes. Greek traders, Egyptian scribes, even Babylonian scholars commented on the Persian roads and their strange, energetic riders. A Babylonian letter from the archives even jokes that a Persian postman rides faster than a gossip with a secret. Honestly, hard to top that for accuracy. Back on the road, the terrain shifts again, rolling hills, wind-cut cliffs, and sudden sprays of spring flowers that refuse to care what empire rules above them. Your horse stumbles briefly, then recovers. You whisper encouragement, and the two of you continue as one. You're sore, sun-dusted, and running on roasted chickpeas and stubbornness. The postal riders had a kind of brotherhood, though unspoken, and rarely romanticized. You recognized each other by your gear, your speed, your aura of sleep deprivation. Some had little leather tokens worn on necklaces passed down from older couriers, like good luck charms made from broken seals or carved beads. There was one legend about a rider who never lost a scroll in 20 years and carried a fox's tooth for fortune. Naturally, everyone wanted a fox's tooth after that. Merchants started selling them. Prices soared. At least one city outlawed fake courier charms due to unlicensed luck trading. And yet, for all its structure and function, the Persian courier system had its limits. Riders sometimes encountered delays, flooded rivers, broken bridges. Unexpected festivals where the roads were blocked by celebratory dancers. A dispatch from the city of Arbala once took 5 extra days because a wedding procession wouldn't move. The courier allegedly joined in for half a song, left his horse with a stable boy, and danced holding the scroll above his head. Priorities still. The system's strength wasn't that it never failed, was that it rarely did, and when it did, it adapted. Replacement riders, alternate routes, messengers sent by boat along rivers when land routes were blocked. There was always a plan B, and sometimes a plan C that involved donkeys, bribes, and questionable rope bridges. As you crest another hill, the next post station comes into view. Mud brick walls, gleaming in the early light. 2 horses already tied. And waiting. You pull the reins gently, slowing your ride. Your thighs are screaming. Your water skin is nearly empty. But the scroll is safe. You've done your part. And now, someone else will ride. The station master greets you with a lazy nod, the kind that says, "You're not the first courier I've seen today, and you won't be the last." You dismount with a half grunt, your legs wobbling just enough to remind you that the human body was never meant to become one with a saddle. Inside the station, the air is cool, thick with the scent of oil lamps and stored grain. A young scribe, barefoot and blinking sleep from his eyes, takes your name and notes the time of your arrival on a long clay tablet. The stylus scratches like tiny hoofbeats on hardened wax. Your scroll is inspected. The seal still intact. Your job still secure. But here's where the Persian system gets clever sometimes. It wasn't just horses and riders delivering messages. In the mountainous or heavily forested regions, especially near Media or Armenia, messages were sent using signal systems. And no, not to guys yelling from hilltops, although that likely happened too. Instead, Persians developed an early form of long-distance signaling using fire beacons and acoustic blast-softened trumpets, gongs, or metal shields. At twilight, a post station could ignite a fire, and a network of high points would echo the light across miles. One flame answered by another, and so on. No parchment changed hands, no horse lost a shoe. Just light bouncing from hill to hill like a quiet drumbeat of warning or command. Sometimes this would be paired with trumpet signals, low tones to signal start. High blasts for all as well. And an especially jarring sequence to indicate we're under attack and the goats are gone too. The goats, of course, were optional, but not the system. For high-priority emergencies, these signals could travel faster than any horse, making it the ancient world's version of a government tweet minus the hashtags and political disasters. Historians still argue whether these systems were consistently accurate or just a backup plan. One camp believes they were finely choreographed, almost like an orchestra of urgency. Another believes they were mostly symbolic. Impressive in theory, but chaotic in execution, like when half the trumpet team oversleeps and the last beacon lights the wrong side of the mountain. You get a bowl of boiled lentils and a crust of barley bread from the station's cook, who glares at you like you personally delayed his nap. It's warm, filling, and tastes slightly of despair, but you're not complaining. After all, you've had worse. There was that one stop with sour milk and a pickled onion so potent it should have been declared a weapon. But your mind lingers on the idea of sending messages with light and sound. How many nights did Persian generals pace near a hilltop, waiting for a flicker of fire that meant reinforcements were coming? How many governors read the distant trumpet echo like an omen, hoping it wasn't the get your scrolls in order blast? Sometimes stations combine the two systems, a horse carrying a detailed dispatch, followed by a trumpet signal to announce its departure or safe arrival. This helped verify that a message wasn't intercepted or lost. It was a multi-layered communication strategy that outpaced most ancient civilizations. And don't think for a second it was only men doing this. Fringe records mentioned female couriers, often in remote satrapies where local traditions included women, warriors, or priestesses who doubled as message bearers. One sealed letter from Bactria is addressed to a woman named Artaziah, a rider of the mountains, who delivered royal scrolls and may have carried an obsidian blade. That blade, if real, now lives in some dusty museum basement, likely mislabeled ceremonial spoon. Back outside, you watch the next rider mount up. He's younger than you, thinner, with a horse that looks as jumpy as a new recruit. He nods once, kicks off, and vanishes down the road like a whisper on stone. Another message flying through the arteries of an empire. You linger for a moment longer, enjoying the rare peace of not moving. Then, as the station master asks if you're staying or returning, you shake your head and motion eastward. There's another station 2 days away that's short-handed. You're not ready to stop yet. The sun is now fully risen, casting long shadows that make the road ahead shimmer like beaten bronze. As you walk toward the stables, you hear something echo from the distant hills, a single, sharp note from a curved bronze trumpet. It rings once, then twice. The stable hands pause, listening, a signal, not urgent, but official. You smile. Somewhere, another message is moving. Somewhere, another courier is breaking dawn with sore legs and an unbroken seal dot, and all across Persia, the road continues. You've been riding so long, the rhythm of hooves has become your heartbeat. Another dusty stretch of the royal road unfolds ahead, flat, shimmering and unnervingly quiet. A crow follows you for a while, flapping lazily from post to post like it's checking your speed. And speaking of speed, let's talk about it. There's this old story, often repeated by scribes with too much wine in their cups, that Darius the Great once got so frustrated with delays in the courier system that he set strict time goals between each station. Monsieur Mark, and you weren't just Latu, were punished. Hit it exactly, and you earned a place in the royal record. Beat it, and well, people started whispering that maybe your horse had wings. The truth. No one really knows if Darius ever enforced a speed quota quite that literally. But he did standardize the route distances, put timekeepers in stations, and even measured how long it took messages to reach certain cities, sometimes to the hour. So if it wasn't a speed limit, it was at least a schedule. And like any good schedule, it came with consequences for being off track. Some postmasters were known for their, let's say, interpretive understanding of the rules. If they liked you, you got a fresh horse and a decent meal. If not, you got a mule that looked like it hadn't napped since Cyrus the Great was in diapers. That's why many couriers kept informal ledgers, private notes carved into bone or scratched onto wax slates that recorded station reputations. Nice, stable, but bread was moldy. Watch for that one-eyed groom, he lies about saddle straps. Word traveled even before the message did. The empire ran like this, not by decree alone, but by subtle, everyday negotiation. Each leg of the journey relied on humans making choices. Bend the rule or break the seal. Push the horse or swap it out early. Eat now or wait for the next station's cook, who may or may not still be mad at the last rider. And there were riders who became legends. You hear their names whispered at stations over firelight. Farhad the Fast, who once did 3 relays without a break. Mina the Smoke Chaser, known for outpacing a wildfire to deliver a warning to a mountain village. And then there's a Shevin, who allegedly leaped a river on horseback when the bridge collapsed, though some say he was just thrown and landed lucky. Of course, not every ride was dramatic. Most of the time, it was just you, the road, and your own thoughts. Which, after enough hours in the sun, got weird. One scroll found in a courier station's wreckage was actually a rider's personal journal. On one particularly long stretch of sand, he listed the names he'd given his saddle sores. There were 5. And yes, They all had personalities. But while your body wears down, the road remains relentless. A courier was expected to keep pace. With the sun ride during daylight, rest briefly at dusk, and pick up again at first light. The system was built not just for endurance, but for timing. A missed connection could throw off the entire sequence of relay handoffs. Imagine a chain made of flesh, bone, and hooves, each link dependent on the next. That's why some believe Darius may have commissioned early sand clocks or water clocks at key stations not to keep time the way we do today, but to measure handoff intervals. A full clepsydra marked the time a rider should take. If it ran over before the next hoof hit the post yard, someone got a talking to. Maybe even a fine. Or worse, kitchen duty with the vinegar steward. Trust me, you don't want that. Historians still argue whether these timekeeping tools were widely used or just rare innovations for elite routes. The archaeological record isn't clear. Some say they were symbolic more for royal show than functional reality. Others argue they were vital to maintaining the empire's internal coordination. Either way, the idea that you could be timed. With a bowl of dripping water while riding through a sandstorm. That's both genius and just slightly passive-aggressive. And speaking of weather, the Persians didn't slow down for it. Couriers rode through heat, hail, rain, and even early snows in the Zagros. The royal edict said the message moved, no matter what. That meant post stations stocked emergency cloaks, firewood, even spiked horseshoes for ice. They were the ancient equivalent of snow tires, minus the jingles. Still, the hardest delays weren't natural, they were political. If a satrap, a regional governor, decided he didn't like the message, he might delay the courier, claim bandit trouble, or reroute the scroll to a safer destination. That's where the king's eyes came in the secret inspectors and enforcers of the royal communication system. You could never quite tell if one was watching. They traveled in disguise, asked odd questions, and sent their own coded messages. If your post got a visit from them, you'd better hope your ink pots were clean and your horse was properly brushed, so you ride with care, not just speed. You ride with vigilance, because while no one's chasing you today, someone's probably measuring you. Somewhere in Persepolis, a tablet may already bear your name, more your mistake. Still, the sun feels warmer now, and a grove of tamarisk trees offers shade up ahead. You guide your horse into its cover, grateful for the break. You sip from your water skin and smile at the thought that this exact pause may have been taken by far, had the fast whore by the guy who once mistook a goat for a postmaster and handed it the scroll. It's not all grandeur out here, but it's real. And it works. The breeze stirs the tamarisk leaves, brushing your cheek with a kindness you haven't felt since your last bath 2 stations ago, under a questionable waterfall. You're back in the saddle, moving again, but your thoughts are quieter now. The message at your side feels less like a scroll and more like a living thing, fragile, important, watching. A bend in the road reveals something unusual, a low stone building with its doors open wide, and a faint scratching sound from inside. As you dismount to stretch your legs, the scent of ink, parchment, and warm wax welcomes you. You've stumbled into a scriptorium, one of the lesser-known but absolutely essential arms of the Persian courier system. This isn't a relay stop. It's a writing hub, a place where messages are duplicated, translated, stored, or resealed. When necessary, quiet, scholarly room filled with a scratch of styluses on parchment and the low, focused hum of concentrated annoyance. Inside, rows of reed pens sit in clay pots, their bristles stained with soot ink made from burnt pine or fishbone. The scribes here don't even glance up when you enter. Their fingers move with robotic precision, copying imperial decrees in Old Persian, Elamite, and Aramaic, the multilingual threads that stitched the empire together. And then there's the corner table, the one with the slightly singed parchment, and 2 scribes whispering very quietly. They're working with something different liquid that gleams oddly under lamplight. Not ink, not wax. Something else. Invisible ink. Or at least, its ancient equivalent. Historians still debate whether the Achaemenids actually used hidden inklemon juice, milk, rice, water, or specially prepared plant sap, but there are enough references in fringe scrolls to suggest it wasn't entirely myth. One document from the archives of Susa refers to a message that could only be read when passed above this sacred flame. That could mean metaphor. It could mean literal firelight revealing hidden letters. Either way, it's a fun excuse too. Imagine ancient spies squinting at toasty scrolls while holding their breath and hoping it wasn't written on goatskin. The scribes also carry cylinder seals, carved stone rollers used to stamp messages closed. These seals are unique, like fingerprints. Some are simple, lines of cuneiform script or floral patterns. Others depict miniature scenes of the king hunting lions, or Ahura Mazda, Persia's chief deity, floating above the chaos like a very calm, very judgy balloon. Once the message is sealed, it's slipped into a hardened leather case. That case is waterproof, flame-resistant, and occasionally padded with wool scraps to protect delicate script. Some historians even suggest the wool was perfumed to deter insects. But let's be honest, probably just made the satchel smell. Slightly less like horse. You watch as a scroll is carefully removed from its casing, duplicated in triplicate, and then re-rolled with an added note in Elamite for clarity. Bureaucracy, you think, never changes. It just gets fancier with its paperwork. There's even a scribe tasked solely with error checking. That's right, ancient proofreading. He reads aloud while another follows along. Stylus tapping for each accurate word. Miss a sentence, and it's back to the ink pot. Of course, not everything is so precise. One preserved message from a far western. Satrap begins with what appears to be a food recipe and ends in an apology for not enough proper scrolls. Another ends mid-sentence with the line, "Tell the king the cows have," and then just stops. Forever, what happened to those cows? Did they rebel? Were they sacred? Historians still argue whether it was an accident, or if it was the world's. First unfinished cliffhanger. Back outside. The scriptorium's roof has a chimney of sorts, just wide enough to let out smoke signals if needed. It's another layer of communication built into the architecture. The idea that every piece of this system, even the scribes, might one day need to signal an emergency or report a missing rider speaks to how interconnected the empire really was. And scribes, they weren't just nerds with good handwriting. Were trained in code writing, not encryption like modern algorithms, but substitution patterns and alternate character systems only understood by insiders. A certain symbol might mean urgent, another might mean eyes only. One odd report even mentions a scroll that required 4 seals from 4 different satrapies to be opened at once on ancient version of a launch code. If you will, you stretch your legs, thank the scribe who hands you a wax-sealed update, and step back into the sun. Your next station is 2 hours ahead, maybe less if your new horse likes your riding style. Spoiler, it won't. As you leave, you catch a final glance of the scriptorium's interior. Not flashy, not loud, but absolutely vital. It's in places like this that the real backbone of Persian power lived, not in swords, but in sentences. You. Ride on, scroll snug in your satchel, saddle creaking like a bored accordion. You think of invisible ink, secret codes, and all the little human moments hidden behind the grand machinery of empire. The scroll you now carry isn't just words pressed into parchment tits propaganda. Not the kind shouted through megaphones or plastered on billboards, but quiet, calculated messaging sent by the Achaemenid kings to remind the world who held the reins. And tonight, as the wind kicks up little bursts of sand along the road, you're a vessel of that royal voice. You ride past a group of farmers tilling the edge of the road. their oxen sluggish in the heat. They glance up at you not because they recognize you, but because they recognize the satchel. The imperial courier's bag is as distinct as a crown, and the people know when that bag passes by. It's carrying decisions that ripple across their fields, their taxes, even their son's conscription. Under Darius the Great, the Persian postal system didn't just spread news, it spread image. Carefully worded scrolls described victories, praised the king's wisdom, and emphasized how very not dead the empire was, even when things were going terribly. These weren't lies. Exactly more like selective enthusiasm. Messages were deliberately timed to coincide with local festivals or tax season, often reminding the satraps of royal generosity, justice, and this is key proximity. "We see you," the scroll said, without needing to say it. Even in places that had never seen Darius's face, his voice arrived in ink. Carried on horseback, historians still argue whether this practice counts as early state branding or simply efficient governance. But there's no denying it had. In effect, governors repeated the king's language in their own decrees. Merchants quoted royal edicts like holy verses. One scroll sent to a rebellious satrap included 6 lines about military consequences and 12 about how the king's blessings ensured a good harvest. Priorities. Some of these scrolls included images used literal drawings, tiny, stylized, line art pressed into clay or painted onto fine parchment, scenes of the king bestowing gifts, or the god Ahura Mazda floating above columns of fire and order. Some scrolls even had perfumed wax seals meant to impress, to suggest wealth, or maybe just to hide the scent of sweaty couriers. One surviving fragment from a station near Babylon features curious mix of administrative data and poetic flourish. Great is the light of the king's wisdom. As the sun touches all roads, so too does his mercy ride with the scroll. It's hard to imagine a bureaucrat saying that with a straight face. But hey, job security, of course, not all messaging, was public. Some messages were designed for internal manipulation, covert notes to satraps reminding them who owed whom, or friendly reminders that a certain noble's loyalty was under review. These were written in plain ink, but packed with political subtext. One courier once accidentally delivered a loyalty test scroll to the wrong satrap. He made it out alive, but only because the recipient was illiterate and gave it to his priest to turn into a prayer. Another lesser-known function of the postal system: cultural reinforcement. The empire was huge, over 20 different languages, dozens of religious practices, and at least 5 major calendars. To maintain cohesion, the king used couriers not just to govern, but to teach. They carried scrolls explaining laws, rituals, even how to observe imperial holidays. In essence, Persia wasn't just delivering policy, was delivering identity. Messages also carried tone. Some scrolls ended with specific blessings depending on the recipient's rank. For satraps, may the king's fire light your judgment. For temple keepers, may the eternal flame see you pure. For military commanders, as the bow is drawn, so may your heart remain steady. These phrases might sound poetic now, but back then, they were carefully coded expressions of hierarchy. You said the wrong one to the wrong person, and suddenly you were explaining to a very angry high priest why he got a general's blessing. And the general, not amused. Back on the road, a dust devil stirs up near a distant grove. Your horse jerks, startled. You tighten the reins, whispering calming nonsense. Oh. The scroll, tucked against your hip, crinkles faintly. It's a reminder. Fragile things carry weight every few miles. You pass a small mark or a carved stone, or a stack of painted tiles, each marked with a royal lion, the winged sun, or just a word, Pars Raha Darayavosh. They're mileposts, yes, but they're also branding, the ancient kind. A visual drumbeat. You are in the empire. You are seen, and it worked. In cities where no soldiers stood, where temples observed local gods, where markets sold Greek olives. Beside Persian dates, there were still scrolls arriving. Still messages reaffirming the power of Susa or Persepolis. The royal road was a stage, and every courier a performer delivering the king's lines. You take a break under an overhang of wind-worn stone, sip from your water skin, and recheck the seal. Still unbroken. You brush a speck of dust from it, more out of habit than necessity. It doesn't matter what's written inside: orders, poetry, veiled threats. To the people who receive it, it speaks with one voice. You mount up again, and as the sun lowers into amber shadows, you become that voice, galloping softly across an empire that listens. The satchel bounces gently against your side as your horse picks its way down a slope of packed gravel. The seal on the scroll inside is unbroken, pressed with the mark of the empire, its tiny grooves and ridges, holding not just clay, but authority. You glance at it instinctively, the way a modern traveler might pat their passport or phone. Still there, still closed, still yours to deliver. You're thinking about those seals, no clay bulla, they're called. Small, rounded lumps of clay, stamped and dried, and used to secure scrolls by threading string through both ends and pressing the soft clay over the knot. Once hardened, the seal could only be broken by the intended recipient. It arrived. Tampered with. Everyone in the room knew someone had done a little unscheduled reading. It's a surprisingly clever system. These seals weren't just security, they were signatures, unique to each official or postmaster. Some featured names or symbols. Others bore elaborate carvings like winged beasts, royal faces, or geometric spirals. If your seal was copied or faked, it meant someone was challenging your identity, your role, your very place in the imperial machine. One tablet from Persepolis references a courier who arrived with a message bearing to seals one real, one fake. The forgery was good too good. It fooled the postmaster until a clever scribe noticed the winged lion faced the wrong way. That minor mistake nearly triggered a provincial investigation. The courier, reportedly, just wanted to go home. Can't blame him. You pass a postmarker half buried in sand. It's chipped but still legible. Station 18. The next one should be a relay gate with a lockbox, where messages too delicate to carry openly are passed through a slit in the wall. The gate opens only from the inside. A pair of guards watch through. A small peephole. You wonder how often they actually blink? These security measures weren't just about theft. They were about trust. In a world without encryption, passwords, or two-factor authentication, Persia relied on clay, wax, and personal reputation. If a satrap received a message with your seal, it meant you were vouched for not just as a writer, but as a witness to whatever was enclosed. Of course, it wasn't always that simple. Sometimes, scrolls were accompanied by a second scroll, one public, one secret. The public one was sealed in clay and read aloud. The secret one might be hidden inside the courier's boot or sewn into the saddlebag lining. It carried the true orders, the king's unspoken thoughts, or the part no one wanted written in the main text. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread, or just a habit of more paranoid kings, or Xerxes II is often mentioned as a fan of double messaging. There's even a tale of a message carved into the wooden staff of a courier, then rubbed with wax and dirt to conceal the writing. To read it, the recipient had to scrape away the surface and soak the staff in vinegar. That's dedication. Or perhaps just someone who really didn't trust envelopes. And then, of course, there were living salespeople. In some cases, the courier was not simply a messenger, but the message itself. A writer might deliver a verbal directive known only to him, memorized in full before departure, never written down. If captured, the scroll could be burned. But the mind, that was harder to erase. One recovered record mentions a messenger named Khotan who carried not scrolls, but orders encoded in song, a method used in mountainous satrapies where scrolls disintegrated in constant rain or were easily intercepted. Khotan sang royal decrees in coded verses. Only those trained in the rhythm could decipher the commands hidden in the rhyme. Was this real? Historians argue, naturally. But a scroll fragment in Elamite does contain line breaks suspiciously close. 2 music meter. Not everything in the system was so sophisticated. Sometimes couriers just swallowed the message literally. Small metal capsules, inscribed with secret notes, were downed with water and, eventually, recovered in ways best not discussed while eating. There's a famous warning carved on a stone tablet at one mountain station: no courier shall lie, steal, or swallow the message of the king, lest he suffer the flame and the lash. Direct, motivational, vivid. You pass a merchant caravan, now slow-moving camels, jingling bells, and a mix of smells that would make a goat flinch. A trader eyes your satchel and gives a respectful nod. He doesn't ask what you're carrying. Everyone knows better as you continue. The terrain changes again, flatland, giving way to dry ridges dotted with thorn bushes and wind-warped trees. A hawk circles above. Somewhere in the distance, the sharp clang of metal, perhaps afar off. Forge, or a noisy farmer disciplining a particularly loud goat. The scroll at your side is a sealed promise. It may contain orders, threats, rewards, or riddles. You'll never know, but it's not your job to know. It's your job to carry it, intact, from hand to hand. Across the bones of an empire, and if you do it right, if the seal is unbroken. The timing is good, and the message reaches the right hands. You've done more than just deliver a piece of clay. You've kept the empire breathing. The wind picks up as you approach the next station, just enough to stir your cloak and remind you that even the air here listens. There's something different about this stretch of road, though. Fewer travelers. The trees hang heavy with silence, and you've been watching your back a little more often. That's because you're now deep in satrapal territory, known for one particularly unpleasant pastime. Espionage, not the glamorous kind, with disguises and rooftop chases, though. Let's be honest, there were probably a few rooftop goats involved. No, this was the dusty, paranoid kind of spying. The kind where couriers had to assume they were being watched, followed, or even targeted, especially if their scrolls hinted at royal dissatisfaction or troop movements. In truth, Persia's vast postal web doubled as a surveillance system. Satraps knew it. Rebels feared it. And couriers. Couriers walked the line between messenger and informant, often without realizing which they were. Some messages were traps intended to be intercepted, used to flush out dissent. Others were layered with codes and decoys, built to reveal who was reading what. And when. You tug your satchel closer. There's a story whispered at certain stations about a courier named Bardia who vanished in the Zagros Mountains. 3 days later, he returned, alive but silent, with the scroll still sealed. When pressed, he only said, "It's not for me to know." The scroll, once opened, contained a single sentence: "Trust the one who does not speak." Historians debate whether Bardia ever existed, or if he was just a metaphor invented by bored scribes trying to sound deep. Still, the fact remains, spies and couriers often collided. In rebellious regions, messengers were watched, questioned, even bribed. Some scrolls were forged entirely, intercepted, copied, resealed. One such case nearly started a war between 2 provinces before the king's eyes discovered that a rebellious satrap had paid a forger to mimic the royal seal. Using a mold carved into the base of a stolen wine cup, innovative and extremely, illegal security increased. More posts adopted message decoys, one scroll carried visibly, another tucked deep into a boot, or even disguised as a saddle lining. There were reports of ink that faded under heat, or codes where only every third symbol mattered. Some scribes were trained in mirror writing, where messages had to be held to polished metal to be read. But not all threats came from outside. Even within the courier system, rivalries brewed. Riders competed for reputation, faster delivery times, better horses, closer access to royal orders. Some postmasters played favorites. A few even sabotaged each other. One station tablet records a formal complaint filed by a courier named Artember, who accused a fellow rider of loosening his saddle straps on purpose. The investigation? Inconclusive. The fallout? Artember got reassigned to swamp routes. Rough. Then there were the traitor couriers, rare, but real. One delivered a scroll to a rebel general instead of the satrap it was meant for. Another tried to sell information to a Greek trader, only to be outed by a station cook with excellent hearing. Consequences varied: exile, imprisonment, or in. One documented case, being forced to copy tax scrolls for 5 straight years in a scriptorium where the inkpots were always dry. And yet, the system held. Why? Because Persia built its roads on redundancy. No single courier knew the whole plan. Scrolls were duplicated. Backup riders shadowed major messages. False scrolls were sent deliberately, clouding the trail. You might intercept one truth, but never the whole. You pass a worn stretch of road now, where 2 couriers once fought. Legend has it, one accused the other of stealing his route. They duelled right there. With reed staffs and clay pots and tell, the scrolls were both destroyed and neither remembered the message. Today, a cracked tablet marks the spot, etched with the phrase, "Let the message be mightier than the messenger." Clever saying, sure. But you, personally, would rather not get into a fight with a guy holding a flaming ink jar. Still, you ride with caution. Even now, centuries later, the fringed scrolls, those dusty tablets, scholars argue over tell of odd. Courier encounters. Messages rewritten mid-ride. Riders who vanished into thin air. Scrolls that changed hands so many times, no one knew where they'd started. One scroll found sealed inside a pottery fragment simply said, "This is not the first copy." It's enough to make you clutch your satchel tighter. And yet, for every shady story, there were dozens of unsung couriers who did the job with quiet pride, who rode not for fame, but for function, who carried secrets with discipline and handed off power with nothing more than a nod. Their names aren't carved into temples, but their hoofbeats built history. Ahead now, the glow of another post station. You see smoke curling from the roof vent, and the silhouette of a stable hand waving. You smile just a little. One more leg, one more sealed truth delivered. You're a courier in a world of whispers, and somewhere out there, someone's listening. Asterisk. The next station is smaller than the others, built against a crag of black rock like it's trying to disappear into the landscape. There's no banner fluttering, no visible seal over the gate. Just a narrow path, a pair of silent guards, and a flickering oil lamp over the doorway. You've arrived in a rebellious satrapy, one of those regions where postal duties get complicated. Here, the roads aren't just routes, they're territorial lines, constantly shifting under the weight of local politics. You've heard the rumors. This station was burned to the ground 2 years ago and only recently rebuilt. Not as an act of forgiveness, but as a declaration. We're still here, it says. Try to ignore us at your own risk. The guards. Check your seal before they speak. One of them is missing an ear, and the other holds a spear the way some people hold grudges. After a long, dry pause, they let you in. Inside, the usual order of a post station feels strained, less polished, more cautious. The scribe squints at you, like you might explode. Even the stable boy keeps one hand on a knife tucked into his. Boot. This isn't paranoia, it's memory. Just a few years ago, this entire region tried to secede. The local governor declared independence, citing unfair grain quotas and divine visions. Messages to and from the capital were intercepted. Couriers were turned away, detained, or in some cases, bribed. The station masters who remained loyal often operated in secret, pretending their stations were abandoned while secretly relaying messages through side trails and back doors. Take a seat on a wooden bench near the wall and sip a weak pomegranate. Tea. It's bitter. Or maybe that's just the atmosphere. Your mind wanders to those days when couriers became the only link between loyal provinces and the throne. You remember stories of messengers traveling under cover of darkness, messages tucked inside hollowed walking sticks. Seals disguised under layers of soot, the Achaemenid court didn't take kindly to disconnection. They retaliated militarily. Yes, but also informationally. Darius sent out waves of couriers, re-establishing the network one station at a time. For months, scrolls moved not just through roads, but through rivers, caves, and couriers in disguise. Some rode with tax ledgers, others with troop orders, and a few with simply the king's voice. You are not forgotten. You are not forgiven. Historians still argue whether the couriers were trained for this kind of work or simply adapted under pressure. One letter from a field commander praises his courier for surviving 3 arrow ambushes and a wolf that misunderstood his saddlebag. Another document dryly notes, "Courier did not return. Message arrived intact." In some of these rebel territories, post stations became makeshift fortresses. They added lookout towers, buried clay tablet archives in nearby hills, and stationed archers disguised as shepherds. Riders would signal their approach using bird calls or knocking 3 times on a rock slab. You might have been delivering a message, but out here, you were also the message that the Empire's presence could not be erased. Even today, this station bears those scars. The sidewall still shows the smoke marks of a long extinguished fire. A corner of the storage shed leans at a suspicious angle, as if it's thinking about collapse, but hasn't committed yet. And the horses, they're leaner, jumpier, trained for speed and survival more than comfort. Your horse is swapped quickly. The new one is named Rostam, according to the stable Handa Good Omen, named for a mythical hero. You mount up, adjusting your saddle and nod once to the guards. One returns the gesture. It's not warmth, but it's not contempt either. Just to people doing their jobs in a system bigger than both of them. As you ride out, the sky has shifted into early evening. The light going soft and golden, like melted bronze. You follow a winding pass through a narrow gorge where rebel scouts once patrolled. The silence here is dense, but not empty. You feel watched. Not threatened, exactly just measured. That's the thing about the Achaemenid network. It didn't just carry information, it created it. Every message that survived these roads, every courier who reached the next post intact, became a story. A lesson. A reminder. Power wasn't just about armies, it was about connection. A ruler who could speak across 1,000 miles with speed and certainty held a different kind of authority. One measured not in swords, but in scrolls. Some scholars say this communication network was the glue of the empire. Others argue it was the whip. You, right now, understand it was both. You pause to let your horse drink from a stone trough carved into the mountainside. Someone once etched a message into the rock above it. Only fools ride alone. The irony isn't lost on you. But as the shadows stretch across the road and the stars begin to show their ancient faces, you know you're not alone. Not really. You ride with every courier who came before you, every hoofprint pressed into this road for centuries. And up ahead, in the flickering lamplight of the next post, someone waits to take the scroll from your hands. Asterisk. The road smooths out as you descend from the high pass, and in the distance, finally, you see the lights of a city. But this isn't just any city. This is Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid Empire. If Susa is the brain, calculating and governing, Persepolis is the memory. A carved marble memory of who the Persians were and who they wanted the world to think they were. You trot past sculpted gates flanked by winged bulls, past quiet sentries whose bronze helmets gleam in the firelight. A boy carries a basket of dates across the street and stares at you in awe. Maybe he's seen a dozen couriers already this week. But still, the sight of that satchel, that seal, draws attention. You don't wave. You're too tired. And frankly, the horse has taken over navigation. The post station here is tucked behind the outer ring of the palace complex, not far from the treasury and the archives. It's bigger, busier, a flurry of activity as scribes, guards, and officials handle the constant flow of scrolls, sealed tablets, and half-dried documents. You dismount with a sigh that's half relief, half arthritis, and hand your scroll to the lead scribe. He accepts it without a word, as though you've merely handed over a lentil stew recipe instead of 2 weeks of sweat and saddle sores. And now you're here, in the shadow of history's filing cabinet, because Persepolis is where the records live. Or, more accurately, where they're carved into stone. The scribes here don't rely on ink and parchment alone. They press history into clay, then bake it permanently, recording every grain tax, every land transfer, every shipment of sandalwood or cypress from the far provinces. These are the Persepolis fortification tablets, tens of thousands of administrative records, written in multiple languages, documenting the empire in obsessive detail. Historians today still haven't finished reading them all. Imagine trying to understand a modern nation using only its tax forms and delivery logs. Now imagine doing it in 4 languages while squinting at shards of ancient pottery. You sit in the scriptorium, sipping spiced water, and listen as the scribes work. One is reviewing an old tablet from 492 BCE, detailing a grain shipment that passed through 5 stations and was subject to unusual goat delays. Another is inscribing a fresh report about a shipment of papyrus from Egypt, noting that one of the carriers may have eaten the corner of the scroll. Accidents happen. One of the lead archivists gives you a nod. He recognizes your route, perhaps, or maybe he just knows the particular look of someone who's spent too many days without a real pillow. You lean against a stone wall, carved with images of delegations bringing tribute to the King Bactrians with horses, Lydians with metal ingots, Ethiopians with ivory tusks. None of them, you note, appear to be carrying scrolls. But you know better. You know that what's carried into Persepolis isn't always visible. Words move this empire, quiet words, sealed words, etched words. Here, the scribes are not just recorders. They are architects of memory. They decide how the story is written, which phrases survive. And through them, the couriers gain immortality, not as names, usually, but as initials, notations, odd remarks scratched into the margin of history. A preserved clay tablet refers to a rider named Ches who arrived with a scroll but forgot his own shoes. Another notes the courier came with 2 scrolls, one wet, one dry, both still legible. It's easy to forget, sometimes, that this grand machinery ran on such human rhythms: wet scrolls, lost shoes, goat-related obstacles. Yet somehow it worked. The system didn't collapse when a message was late or a station burned. It flexed, adapted, rewrote itself on the fly, and always preserved the flow of information. Historians still debate the true function of Persepolis. Some argue it was never a full administrative capital, more of a ceremonial showpiece than a governing hub. Others believe it functioned as a kind of logistical nerve center where the empire's massive accounting system was refined and perfected. The truth may lie in between, but what's clear, standing in its shadow, is that this place values preservation. It treats every message as sacred, every record as proof that the empire lived and breathed. You rest now, briefly, in the courtyard near the archives. Nearby, a clay bulla cools in a sun-warmed tray. A scribe walks past with a basket of reed styluses. In the distance, someone is humming an old courier's song soft, slow. The kind you only hear when ink meets clay under torchlight. Your horse sleeps nearby, tail flicking lazily at flies. And you? You're finally not in motion. The scroll has been delivered. The seal has been passed. But even now, something else begins, a new scroll to be carried, a new route to trace, a new moment added to the endless library of movement that keeps Persia awake. Asterisk. You leave Persepolis at dawn, not with a fresh scroll this time, but with something different, a memory. The kind that sits with you long after the ink fades. You carry it quietly, tucked between breaths as the hooves of your horse drum a steady rhythm across the valley floor. This new leg of your journey winds through quieter lands, where post stations are fewer, and riders often go a day or more without seeing another soul. It's not desolate, just forgotten. This is where the road begins to fade, where the glory of the empire loosens its grip. And the Persian Pony Express, as modern historians jokingly call it, starts to weaken. You pass villages that no longer keep their relay horses. You ride through outposts where the gates are unguarded and the scroll logs haven't been updated in months. The stone markers are still there, but moss-covered, their inscriptions fading. Some stations now serve as barns. One has been converted into a shrine. A child watches you ride past, eyes wide with a kind of wonder that feels out of time. This is what decline looks like, not fire and chaos, but quiet neglect, a slackening of the reins. A shift in attention. It began, most agree, after the death of Darius. His successors, notably Xerxes, inherited the roads, the scribes, the stations, but not always the will to maintain them. Wars stretched the empire's resources. Rebellions in Egypt, pressures from Greece, internal squabbling among satraps, it all demanded more attention than scrolls and seals. And then came Alexander. When the Macedonian forces surged into Persia, they didn't just bring spears. They brought speed, strategy, disruption. Alexander knew the roads were arteries, so he cut them. He occupied stations. He rerouted messengers. He used the Persian system to map his conquests, turning the empire's own communication web into a weapon against itself. Some postmasters surrendered immediately, exchanging scrolls for survival. Others fought, burning archives, hiding horses, disguising couriers as farmers. One scroll fragment, recovered decades later, contains a line carved hastily into clay. Do not wait for Sardis. It is already lost. You feel the shadow of that. Time in these hills. It lingers, not in the ruins, but in the rhythm, like a song that keeps slowing down until the notes stretch too far apart to hold the melody. Historians still argue whether Alexander's conquest completely dismantled the Persian relay system or merely repurposed it. Evidence shows that he kept parts of Atria signing stations, retraining riders, translating documents into Greek. But the soul of the system, the rituals, the seals, the codes began to fray. A few couriers resisted. One legend tells of a rider named Tirdad who rode for 3 straight days to warn Persepolis of an incoming siege, only to arrive and find the gates already open to the invaders. He burned his scroll in the street and disappeared. True or not, the story became a whisper among later scribes. Ride fast, but not so fast you miss the ending. Still, the infrastructure was too good to vanish entirely. Later, empires then. Parthians, the Sassanids, even the early caliphates would inherit these bones. They patched the roads, rebuilt the stations, renamed the routes. But the DNA was Persian. In Central Asia, you find echoes of this network in the Silk routes. Some caravanserais, those massive roadside inns, were once Persian post stations, repurposed to serve traders instead of scroll bearers. Travelers report finding old clay seals buried in corners or scratched inscriptions in Old Persian beneath layers of Arabic calligraphy. The Ottomans, centuries later, adopted courier networks that bore a strange resemblance to the royal road. Fixed intervals, fresh horses, sealed bags. Even their imperial messengers carried something similar to a bulla, though made of bronze. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's just that good ideas have a long shelf life. And here's the truth. You begin to feel in your bones, no road truly ends. Not even when the empire does. Shifts. Becomes something else. A trail, a memory, a myth. You ride now along a path that was once carved by engineers under Darius. Resurfaced by Roman spies, ignored by Mongol scouts, and rediscovered by archaeologists, poking at a suspicious line of stones in the dust. You ride with them. In a way, every hoofbeat an echo of the thousands who came before. The sun is lowering now, gilding the landscape in long gold streaks. The next station is far, but you're in no hurry. You feel the road under you like an old friend's hand. It's quieter here, but not silent. The past has a pulse. As you crest a hill, you look back toward Persepolis, toward Susa, toward everything that came before. You can't see them, of course, just haze and shadow, and distance, but you know they're there. Buried under centuries, yes, but not forgotten, the road remembers. Asterisk. The stars come out one by one, quiet and deliberate, as if someone is lighting candles across the ceiling of the world. You've set up camp just off the old rota-flattened patch of earth that might have once been a station courtyard, or a place where horses were watered, or nothing at all. It doesn't matter. It's night, it's your home. You're lying on your back, staring at the dark velvet sky, your satchel tucked under your head. It's empty now, your message delivered, your seal transferred, your duty fulfilled. But you can't sleep, not yet. Because this isn't just a pause, it's the turning of a page. Your thoughts drift eastward toward the Silk routes, the long, snaking arteries of trade and culture that would one day stretch across Asia. What most people don't realize is that many of those famous roads followed Persian footsteps. The relay stations, the interval logic, even the practice of pre-stocked fresh animals at checkpoints, those weren't Silk Road innovations. They were Persian postal legacies, repurposed and extended. You imagine a Chinese merchant in the Han Dynasty, cart packed with silk and lacquerware, pulling up to a station built centuries earlier by Darius's engineers. Maybe he doesn't know who Darius was. Maybe he doesn't care. But the stone under his sandals still remembers. Historians trace some of the Persian system's influence through Bactria and Sogdiana, regions that became linguistic and logistical bridges between Persia and the East. Even the terminology of relay and seal crops up in multiple empires after adjusted for local flavor, but unmistakably inspired. There's even a story, half history, half traveler's tale, about a Sogdian courier who crossed 8 languages and 2 desert empires using nothing but royal tokens, a memorized poem, and one extremely determined donkey. The details are murky. The donkey part might be metaphor or not. Scholars still argue whether this was early propaganda or just a very charismatic animal. But back in your present tan, this patch of starlit dirty, start to realize something. The Achaemenid postal system wasn't just about roads or horses or scrolls. It was about possibility. The possibility that an idea could move faster than an army, that a promise could arrive before a sword, that a king's command could travel hundreds of miles without losing its shape. Carried by strangers who didn't need to believe in the words, just protect them. You shift slightly, staring at the stars. The Persian astronomers, those men with sand-filled clocks and patience like stone, probably looked at the same constellations, plotting calendars and messenger rotations by their glow. Maybe they watched Orion's belt and knew it was time to rotate the night riders. Maybe they counted the days between phases of the moon to measure how long a scroll should take to travel from Sardis to Susa. You wonder how many messages were lost to floods, to thieves, to forgetful riders who stopped to admire a grove and never left. The royal road was efficient, yes, but not perfect, and it didn't need to be. Its strength was in its scale, not its flawlessness. Even when scrolls were lost, the road endured, and the stories, they filled in the blanks. Scrolls gone missing became tales of betrayal or ghost riders. One fragment from a border station records a message supposedly carried by a courier who died en route, only for the scroll to arrive anyway, carried, as the scribe puts it, by wind or horse, or will alone. Most likely, a second rider finished the job. But the myth took root. You close your eyes and let the road live in your thoughts. You picture the cities, again Persepolis, Susa, Ecbatana connected, not just by stone, but by trust. Riders handing off scrolls in the dead of night. Scribes whispering messages to remember in case the parchment failed. Horses trained to run without reins. Guards watching the horizon. For signals and FIRELIGHT, you think of the king remote, godlike, seated on his throne in a stone palace carved with lions. He may have never ridden the royal road himself, but through it, he touched every province, every village, every outpost, and you. You were his breath. 1,000 years from now, someone might stumble on a broken clay seal in the dirt and wonder whose message it once held. They might dust it off, place it on a museum shelf, label it unknown courier, see, 5th century BCE, and they'll be right, but they'll miss the truth that the message was delivered. That's what mattered. Asterisk. You wake just before dawn to the quiet sound of wind brushing over the old road. It's the kind of morning that feels suspended in amber, neither night nor day. The sky still holding its breath. You pack up your things slowly, every movement, carrying the weight of all the miles you've ridden. There's no scroll in your satchel now. It's no sealed message or carved clay token. But as you mount your horse one last time, the road calls out anyway, not with orders, but with memory. With echoes, you follow the path east, not because you must, but because there's something in your legs that still understands rhythm, that wants to ride, not for glory or gold, but simply to feel the road under you once more. You pass a broken milestone, half buried in weeds. You pause, brush off the dust. The carving is nearly gone, but you make out the faint lines of old Persian script, "May the road carry you true." The phrase stirs something in your chest further along. You see what's left of a station, just a few cornerstones and a cracked water basin. An old postmarker stands crooked in the ground, now home to a nest of desert birds. But the layout is familiar. You could walk it with your eyes closed. Stables to the right, sleeping quarters in the back, and the dispatch table where scribes once sat, fussing over clay tablets and arguing about the spelling of city names. The empire has long since faded, but the architecture of movement remains. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can hear the clatter of hooves, the barked orders, the scratch of reed pens across wax. You can imagine the scent of smoke from early morning cookfires, the taste of barley bread baked too long, the weight of a scroll against your ribs. And you think, maybe this is what empires are. Not marble statues, not even palaces, but systems patterns that keep people moving, that connect villages to cities, kings to farmers. Thoughts to paper, you ride past a shepherd who waves lazily from his perch on a rock. His goats seem unimpressed, but you nod in return. He doesn't know who you are. He doesn't need to. The road remembers. That's enough as you descend into the lowlands. The The scenery opens up fields, scattered trees, a winding river glinting. In the morning light, a fisherman works the banks, casting his net in the same rhythm you once used to tie scrolls. Everyone has their craft, and then, finally, you slow to a walk. You dismount, you let your horse drink. You sit beside the water and stretch your tired legs. For the first time in what feels like months, you don't need to be anywhere. You don't have to pass anything on. The message is delivered. The ride is done. Still, you keep the saddlebag. Because maybe, just maybe, someone, someday, will hand you another scroll. Asterisk. The last rays of sunlight touch the horizon now, soft and golden, as the world settles into stillness. The wind has died down to a hush, like the road itself is exhaling after a long day of holding your weight. You feel it in your shoulders, in the soles of your feet, in the quiet ache behind your eyes, kind of gentle tiredness that asks nothing more than rest. Somewhere in the tall grass, crickets begin their quiet evening rhythm, and the rustle of leaves joins them, a lullaby for anyone who's ever followed a path longer than they thought they could. You close your eyes and breathe in the air warm, dry, touched with the faint scent of dust and cedarwood. The same air couriers once rode through, scrolls at their sides, carrying words that held kingdoms together. They're gone now, but their roots remain, drawn across the land like invisible lines of trust and intention. And you were there. You felt the road under you. You passed through the stations. You saw the ruins, still whispering secrets. You carried the weight of a sealed promise, even if you never read the words inside. That's the magic of old stories, isn't it? They let you walk someone else's road, ride someone else's horse. For a little while, you became a thread in the tapestry of something vast and ancient. Now, let that journey fade into the quiet. Let the road stretch out behind you like a ribbon falling into dusk. You've ridden far enough for tonight. Rest easy now. Asterisk.